Today, I'd like to welcome you all, and special thanks and special welcome to our two presenters today, who are Heather Arnold, who is the president of the Kooyarrup Swamp Historical Society, and Jane Rivett-Carnac, who's the president of the Narre Warren and District Family History Group. So thank you, ladies, and welcome to all. And Heather, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Michelle, and thanks for organising this again, like you organised everything so well. So today we're looking at not everything is online, as Michelle said. How ironic, it is online, but you know, what the heck. So you may know me, I was local history librarian here at Casey Cardinia Libraries. So I've used a lot of books over the years. So I'm looking at a short session on Casey Cardinia local histories, and then Jane will look at what I like to think is the rest of the world, and she'll look at everything else after that. So I'm going to start by talking about some of my favourite or most well-used histories of the Casey Cardinia region. So not everything is online. So we're going to look first at some basic references that cover the Casey Cardinia region. And the first one I want to look at is The Good Country, Cranbourne Shire by Niall Gunston, published in 1968. And it's just such a wonderful book. It's got, not only is it a wonderful book, it's a wonderful index as well. So if you have any connections to the old Shire Cranbourne, which was essentially Cranbourne, Kooyarrup, Lang Lang, Delmore, all those regions, the Kooyarrup Swamp plus Cranbourne, Hampton Park. It's just such a great book, wonderful index. It also has a full list of Shire Cranbourne councillors to 1968. And it has an interesting article by Henry Boxall about families from Yallock. So Yallock was a soldier Yallock was a soldier settlement, a village settlement on the Kooyarrup Swamp. And here I can introduce Carlo Catani. Village settlements were established on the Kooyarrup Swamp by Carlo Catani. So a lot of very small farms, and so there was about 100 sort of small settlers or small farmers in the Yallock region, and they're all listed in the little article by Henry Boxall published in the Good Country book. So it is just such a go-to book for anything about the history of the Shire of Cranbourne, and very authoritative and everything like that. So I can't recommend this book highly enough. There was also a update of it, so from 1968 to 1988, written by Fred Hooper, who was the headmaster of Kooyarrup High School when I was there. So that's just a little, quite a small volume, only about 100 and just over 100 pages, but it's just an update of the Shire of Cranbourne from 1968. And if you can imagine the development that took place in Cranbourne, in the Cranbourne region from 1968 onwards, I mean, it's just gone out of sight now. But, it does sort of cover that era where they were beginning to have suburbanisation in the Cranbourne region and things like that. So that's another great book. Some of the books I'm talking about are available. They should be all available in our library. Well, they're all available at the Kooyarrup Swamp Historical Society, which I could sell you if you like. Now, so that was the Shire of Cranbourne. So if you want to look at the history of the old Shire of Berwick, there's Early Days of Berwick. Oh, we haven't got a title for that. And it was published by this is published by Rotary, but it was republished. This version here was republished by the Berwick-Pakenham Historical Society, and it was first published in 1948, revised in 1959, another revision in 1979, and this edition here that you can see on your screen is from 2005. And this is the only edition, the 2005 edition, which is actually indexed. And I know it's a bit dated, and it has some interesting attitudes, a lot of things, and some people say a lot of errors, but I actually think it's such a great book if you want the early European history of the old Shire of Berwick, including Beaconsfield, Upper Beaconsfield, Harkaway, Narre Warren and Narre North. And one of the joys of the book is that it was written by locals with long-term connections to towns. So I'm just going to read out 3 little short paragraphs, which is why I think it's such a wonderful book for the European history of the area. So one paragraph tells us that 2 Crimean War veterans, Mr. Drummond and Mr. Adams, resided in High Street, Berwick. These two old gentlemen, wearing their Crimean War medals, could often be observed sitting in the boulevard, enjoying the sunshine. It was said that Mrs. Drummond was a contemporary with and associated with Florence Nightingale, nursing at Crimea. And the next paragraph is, Mr. James Ogilvy and family lived on Buchanan's Road for many years. The son of one of Melbourne's earliest solicitors, Mr. Ogilvy was enrolled as one of the first pupils when Scotch College, Melbourne was opened. And he also witnessed the departure of the Burke and Wills expedition in 1860. And this last paragraph, Mrs. Fanny Hume Hutchinson, who was resident in Peel Street, Berwick for 29 years, was the granddaughter of Hamilton Hume, the early explorer who came to Australia in 1790 and with Hubble made their memorable journey to Port Phillip in 1824. So it's this type of information that I feel really makes this book a wonderful resource for the original settlers, the original European settlers in the area. And I think this just detail of Mr. Drummond and Mr. Adams sitting there in High Street, Berwick, in the sunshine with their Crimean War medals, I think it just paints such a lovely picture. And there's lots and lots of little stories like that in this book, and it's well worth reading, and it's a great resource as well. But as I said, only this edition here, the 2005 one, has an index. Still worth getting though. In the wake of the pack tracks, this is another book published by the Berwick Pakenham Historical Society, and it covers the old Shire of Berwick, which went from Doveton essentially all the way to Bunyip, and then north to Cockatoo, Hackaway, Cockatoo, Gembrook, and south it is Coralline and Iona. So the old Shire of Berwick. It's a good school project book is what I used to think of it as. Got lots of illustrations, just a short chapter on every town in the region, and it's really such a great book. Its predecessor, From Bullock Tracks to Bitumen, was published in 1962, and it's an update on that book as well. But it is a great book, published in 1982. So it's a bit not dated, but it hasn't been updated since then. But it doesn't really matter because it still is a great book on the early history of all the towns in the old Shire of Berwick. And this is the story of the Dandenongs by Helen Coulson. And Mrs. Coulson just died recently. She was, I think, 104 years old. I actually thought she'd already passed, but, so she just passed recently. And she wrote this book in 1959, and it's a history of the old Shire of Ferntree Gully. And most of the towns, of course, that she covers aren't part of Casey or Cardinia, but we do have lots of links to these towns because the Scoresby ward of the old Shire of Berwick was until 1889. No, the Scoresby ward of the Ferntree Gully Shire was actually part of the old Shire of Berwick until 1889. So towns like Clematis, Emerald and Eversley were originally part of the Shire of Berwick, and then they became part of the Shire of Ferntree Gully. Anyway, it covers towns such as Emerald, Macclesfield, Eversley, Narre Warren North, Narre Warren East, Clematis, Menzies Creek, etc. Great book if you just want the early European history of the Ferntree Gully Shire. Anyway, one of my favourite stories in this book is the story about the Rowe family. So Rowville is named after the Rowe family, and Frederick Rowe was a co-founder of Goldsborough Rowe and Company. They were Melbourne wool brokers, and he acquired land in the 1860s in what we call Rowville now, and called his property Stamford Park. And Frederick and Elizabeth Rowe built a magnificent house there in 1882, which is still there, now surrounded by houses, and listed by the National Trust, listed on the National Trust and the Register of the National Estate. And they entertained lavishly, especially during the spring racing season, and lived quite extravagantly. Mrs. Rowe used to spend £100 on a Melbourne Cup outfit, which is the equivalent of about $5,000 today, and had the reputation of being the haughtiest woman who ever stood in a pair of boots. So, and Frederick Rowe was also said to have been the first person to introduce sparrows and hares into Australia. So, whether he should be congratulated or condemned, I don't know. But they're the sort of stories that you're going to get in this book here, The Story of the Dandenongs by Helen Coulson. So, well worth tracking down. And here's a few pictorial references that are well worth buying. Berwick Nostalgia. Three of these are published by the Berwick Pakenham Historical Society, and Audrey Dodson's here today. So they have a website and you can buy these books from them still. This is a great book. Lots of great photos of Berwick. Like, it's just a wonderful resource. And there's 2 examples of some photographs. So 3 photographs of the water tower in Berwick. And this one here, the old post office, one of my favourite photos, a little girl on a pony outside the old Berwick post office. So they're the sort of great photos you'll find in this book. North of the Line, so this is their Berwick Pakenham Historical Society's book on the old Pakenham Shire. So it goes basically from Beaconsfield to Bunyip, as well as looking at Cockatoo and Gembrook, so north of the railway line. It's a great book, great, love, lots of great photos as well. This is a great photo. That's the Queen Carnival in Pakenham. And this one here is the Tynong Juniors. I look a bit old, some of these to be junior. Tynong Juniors Football Club. So they're the sort of great photos that are part of the Berwick Pakenham Historical Society collection and that are published in this book. Trees and Hedges, and this is their book on Narre Warren, Narre North and Harkaway. Also, once again, wonderful photos. And there's 2 examples here. This is the Narre Warren North Young Farmers Club. I love this photo. It's a great photo. You can see it here. They're all named as well. And this one here is the Hillsley Farm, which is owned by the Robinsons. So just 2 examples of that's the old storage shed there, and all their cabbages that they grew there, or cauliflowers, I mean. So lots of great little photos like that. A little bit of information, as you can see, but not too much, and mainly a pictorial reference. So those 3 great books are from the Berwick Pakenham Historical Society. And this one here, Emerald in Focus, published by the Emerald Museum. So what's it called? Emerald Museum and Nobelius Heritage Park. So they have a small museum up in Emerald, part of the old Nobelius Nurseries area. And they have these photos here. So this is just 2 different pages of various photographs and just, as I said, once again, a small bit of text as well. But, you know, great books that sort of show the history of the area. So there's 4 pictorial references well worth tracking down, and they're all still in print. This one here you can buy from the Emerald Museum. The other 3 from the Berwick Pakenham Historical Society. And, of course, you can borrow them from our library. Specific local histories, like there's millions of these, as you might imagine. So here's just a few examples. This is our great little book, History of Doveton, and this is Maria Harding, who lived in Doveton, and she talks about the establishment of the Housing Commission in Doveton from the 1950s right through to the, I think it was published by 1993. A great book looking at Doveton and the community and everything else. It's just a wonderful little booklet. It's only about 40 pages, but it's a wonderful little booklet. This one here, History of Pearsdale, published by the Pearsdale Public Hall Committee. And this, as I said, these are just 4 examples that I found. This is Mr. and Mrs. Pearce, after whom Pearsdale is named there on the cover. Forest of Farming by Genseric Parker, or Bill Parker as he's known, and he wrote this book in 1995. So that's a history of Gembrook, another great book. Lots of photos in it as well, and lots of great information. A wonderful book. And Call of the Bunyip by Denise Nest. She wrote this book in 1990 and looks at the history of Bunyip, Iona and Tonnenbuck. So once again, a great book, republished recently by the Berwick Historical Society. And it's a great book, but there's probably a history of nearly every town in the Casey Cardinia region. And Michelle, I've made a list, and Michelle, I believe, has emailed them out to you. So I did today. So, you know, these are just, as I said, 4 examples. Oh, this one here. That's another great one. Charles Wilson wrote this up at Beaconsfield, an early history. Wonderful book. That includes families and looks at the history of all the towns and everything, like history of all the properties in there and the families. It's just a wonderful book. Lots of great photos. School histories. So these are just a few. Oh, Audrey's here listening to us today. Beaconsfield Primary School, written by Audrey, published in 1990. This one has lots of photos in the back and just memories of the school. Officer Primary School, written by Eileen Williams. Once again, lots of photos and also class lists. So as you may know, school history is published back in the olden days, like about 20 years ago, often had a list of every student who went to the school. Well, we don't have that these days due to privacy reasons, but this one here has all the list of students right up to 1986. So if your family was in the area, it's well worth tracking down if you can get it, see if there's a school history, because I often list the years that your ancestors were there. Tooradin, 125 years of coastal history, has once again a full list of students plus a little history of the Delmore School and the other one. Delmore, Tooradin and Tooradin North schools as well. So this book is available at the Cranbourne Shire Historical Society, and we also have it in the library, but it's a great book. So looking at the history of the area and the history of the school as well. Great, wonderful book. Look to the Rising Sun, published in 1984, history of Cardinia, and includes Rithedale and Pakenham South. Once again, a full list of students from the schools, lots of information about families and buildings and properties and everything. It tells you, so there was a couple of local schools, the one at Rithedale, which closed early. There's Lisbourne, another local school, and a list, and because it has lists of pupils, it's a wonderful, valuable resource for that. But it also has lots of photos and history of the footy club and lots of names, etc. So if you have ancestors that came or relatives that came from the Cardinia region, that's a good book to have a look at. And once again, these are just some examples, and there's millions and more local histories around. Specific subjects. This is a great book. Settlers and Sawmillers. This one here by Mike McCarthy and his companion book, Bell Breaks, Bullocks and Bushmen. So this is a look at sawmilling and tramway history of Gembrook. And this previous one is history of the West Gippsland tramways. And this one here goes from basically Berwick right down through, well, it goes all the way through to West Gippsland. So it covers from our region, Berwick right through to Bunyip. And it has lots of maps of the old tramways that used to service the sawmills and history of the mills. And it's just, they're both just wonderful books. I love local histories, in case you can't tell. And just a few more examples. Great Southern Railway Line. This is the South Gippsland Railway Line that went through from Melbourne right through Cranbourne, Koorup, down to Leongatha, down to Port Albert. Great little history of that. Published in 1970. It's out of print now. But, you know, if you have an interest in railways or interested in the towns that it went through, this is a great book. Lots of great photos in this one. Cinder Strzelecki, celebrating its 100th birthday at the moment. So the railway line that went from Koorup to McDonald's Track through Bales, Catani, Yanathan, right through to Strzelecki, opened in June 1922 and fully closed by 1959. But, you know, interesting little history by Marilyn Ramsey. Hard to get, but it's well worth tracking down if you have an interest in railways or an interest in the region. So that's another example of a local history. And lots of church histories, of course. So this is written by Damien Smith, The History of St. Joseph's, Iona. If you know where Iona is, it's sort of between Coralline and Garfield. There's a huge Catholic church there built. Original one was like 1904. I think the modern one you can see in the bottom right-hand corner here was 1937, I think it was open. So like just a really interesting little history of the St. Joseph's, Iona, and the schools there as well. So once again, if you have any ancestors that came from this region, another book that's worth chasing up. And a later book written by Rob Wilson, who was, as you may know, Shire City Casey Councillor. This is a history of the Berwick Church of Christ, which started in High Street, Berwick, and of course then has moved now to Homestead Road, I think. So that's a little book that he wrote, full list of all the office bearers and everything in that as well. So an interesting little booklet as well. So lots of church histories though, and this is just an example of two of them. And couldn't leave this one out, of course. This is written by Dave Roberts, From Swampland to Farmland, a history of the Koorup flood protection area, or essentially a history of the drainage of the Koorup swamp, an area dear to my heart. So that's another great little book, and just another example of some of the many topics that local histories cover. And two more before I go. So this one isn't actually specifically Casey Cardinia, but it is a great little book because it helps you locate missing towns. So, you know, sometimes you're you're looking at birth certificates or death certificates of your ancestors or reading articles in the newspaper, and you think, I've never heard of this town before, and it's because probably the name has changed. So this will tell you that Cannibal Creek became Garfield, that Tobin Yallock later became Lang Lang, and initially the Emerald Goldfield diggings were listed in the 1871 census as Irish town. So that's the sort of information you might get from this book. I think we have it in the library. And it also lists the populations of the towns as well. So it is a great little history if you have ancestors in Victoria and you can't work out where they actually came from because the town does not exist. And here's one fact. Berwick grew from a population of 60 in 1861 with 14 dwellings, and in 1901 they had 98 dwellings and 452 people. So they're the sort of facts you'll get out of this book. And finally, Vision and Realisation. It's a 3-volume history of the Education Department of Victoria. You may think it's boring, but like it's just such a wonderful resource, because one of the great things about schools is that schools pop up. So there might be a mining community, and all of a sudden a school pops up because there's like 30 kids there, and then 10 years later the mine's worked out and the whole school disappears. So this book covers all these all the schools that have come and gone in the first 100 years of free education in Victoria. And it will tell you sort of the enrolment numbers, when the school opened, may list some of the headmasters, or the head teachers, may list some of the teachers. You may get family information out of it like that. So it just sort of is a good short history of every school in Victoria that was opened before 1973. Also includes high schools and a little bit on technical schools as well. Just a wonderful resource. Right, so that's my quick look at what I consider wonderful local histories for the Casey Cardinia region, and I'll stop sharing my screen. No, I won't. Oh, geez, stop share. There we go. And here I'm back again. So very quick tour of Casey Cardinia local histories, and now I'll hand you over to Jane, who will tell you about, as I said, the rest of the world. Yes.
Okay, so it's not all online, and this photograph here hasn't got our vision and realisation in there, but this is a photo of our room, and all these lovely green books here are all education books. So following on the theme that Heather's just spoken about, those sort of books are a wealth of information to give you guidance to what was happening in a school at a particular time. So, how-to books. Now, I'm going to concentrate more on types of books, not necessarily my favourite, but with reasons as to why I use these books on a regular basis. Now, the how-to books, this is books that are in our library, and even though some of them now can be 20 and 30 years old, they're still relevant if you're searching on a specific place or you're searching on a certain time frame, because these people have already done the hard work of doing the research to find out what's available. And if you look at what's on the internet today, most of it is things that are in these books. But looking at one of these little books or borrowing it, you've got everything in one place, and you can just sit there, make your notes of what you want to look at, make notes of what you can't find. The more recent ones will even give you a list of what websites to go to. And they're a really valuable source for people who are starting out on research, whether they're researching family or researching a place or a topic. There's still a relevant reason to borrow these books. And most of them in this series here are Australian produced with Australian authors and very much geared up to the research we're doing here. So then you've got subject specific, and unfortunately my flash bounced back at me, but dating photographs, these two books, there are others, but these two books in particular are very good, and you can borrow them and take them home, and you can sit there with your box of photographs for the next 3 or 4 weeks, systematically going through them and looking at the dresses and looking at the men's hairstyles and whether they've got a moustache, to try and establish your unknown photographs to what era it might be, gives you a clue as to who the person might be. And even an older book is still going to give you information. And yes, you can go searching on the internet, but it's much more fun to sit there with a book and go backwards and forwards next to your box of photographs, rather than try and figure out what words should I put into the computer to find the Google answer. Country-specific books, the Irish Civil Registration book, that's quite an old book, but it's the basic starting of civil registration, what they did, how they stored it, where it was, how you can access it. Knowing the basics of how something starts also gives you the clues to what you're not going to find. So it's no good looking for a civil registration before civil registration started. That then tells you you've got to go to a parish church. And then you've got country specific. So, you know, you might be someone who's looking at German ancestry. This little book here is records, and it's an Australian written book by a German descendant. They've got the knowledge and they've put it all together in one place for you. Or you've got something like this one here, which is medical terms. So you've got your death certificate and you think, I have no idea what that means. This little book goes through all the various terms that you're going to come across on a death certificate and other information that can help you sorting out a family story. And as Heather said, school books. I'm a bit passionate about school books. Apart from giving you the history of the school, a lot of school books will give you biographies on people, apart from the photos and the teachers, a list of achievements of these people. This one here, the Geelong Grammarians, is particularly good if you've got male ancestors in the Western District. A large percentage of those young boys were sent to Geelong Grammar boarding school. And this particular book has pages and pages of mini biographies of the men. So, you know, you might get his photo, tells you, obviously he was a serviceman in World War I, or you might just get a story here. This is a MacArthur man and there's no photograph. But further into the book, there's a photograph of a sports team. And here's the Mr. MacArthur in that photograph. So if you just pick up the book and glance at it and go, oh, no, there's no photo, you've missed the opportunity. Go to the index and see if it's mentioned on 2 pages and then go to the second page. And sure enough, there's your photo that you're looking for. And that might be the only photo you're going to find. That person may not have got into a newspaper or done anything that was famous, or the family photos got lost in a fire. That could be the only photo you find of that person. So those sort of books are really valuable. And most big country towns, Ballarat, Geelong, down at Warrnambool, they had schools that were boarding schools and day schools, and they cover both in their books. And they also give you a hint onto the history of the area and who was doing what and how wealthy it was becoming or how poor it was becoming. So it's always good to have a look at those books. School magazines. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a mother who kept everything like I did, here's my 1965 school magazine. And as Heather said, it's not a book, it's the magazine the school put out each year, but this one lists all the students, and it put them into family names and their forms. So it gave you an idea of how many family members went to the school at the same time. And it, you know, came out for every year, I gather. So, and if you wanted to, you could probably get in touch with your old high school or your old tech school, if it still exists, and see if they've got the school magazines in their library and can you get access to them. It's no different to going any other library. You just send an email off to the school library and ask them for help. The education department, apart from books that they publish to help teachers and help the schools, they also publish these 2 fabulous books about the men who served in World War I and World War II. You get these large photographs of those men who died, and you get a biography on them, and it sometimes gives you information about their relatives and other men who served in the family. If they returned, you'll get a nice little biog of them, and a photograph if there was a photograph supplied. And again, this might be the only place where you're going to find a photograph of that soldier, even though we tend to think that all the soldiers had their photographs taken before they went to war. They didn't, and there were lots of photographs taken that for one reason or another are not identified, so they're not being put on the Australian War Memorial website. But families are slowly been adding them to other websites. But here's a book. If you knew how to teach her, you can go through, and they didn't have to be headmasters. They could have just been, you know, the student teacher as it was in those days. And this is for the whole of Victoria. So then there's books that are written for the pioneers and town histories. This is our book, Our Early Settlers of Casey Cardinia, where people who were family members wrote little biogs, provided photographs. The group did research on local people, and it's all in one place. It's just a little snapshot of a person or a family. Some are a bit more extensive, but again, it could be the only place where you're going to find a photograph of a family member. Or you've got books that are written for a specific place, like Old Tallangatta. This is a relatively recent book, and one from my library, and I purchased it at a second-hand bookshop because when I leave, you know, I just stand there and leaf through the book in case there's an index. It's the first thing I go to. And here is a photograph of one of the family businesses of a family member, and a couple of pages later there's a little advert for another business that they were running. There was quite a lot of other references in there, but then as I got home, when I got home and started reading it, I realised it also had a lot of references to the women who married into this particular family. There was references to their families, so it gave me a lot more information of what they were doing, how they related to one another, and how the region grew over a period of years. So it's a good book. And then Pioneer Registers. Now, this is before the day of the internet and before the day of instant, I've got a certain follow a leaf mentality of it's, you know, quick and easy, just go on the internet. These are the people who did all the hard work, who went to the cemeteries and walked around and transcribed, who found cemetery registers and cross-checked their transcriptions and added everything in, who were living in the area and knew the people. These books are fabulous because even though they may be, you know, 20, 30 years old, they've actually got wonderful information in them that's not on the internet, that's not on Find a Grave or Billion Graves or anything like that, because they've gone to the original registers for the cemeteries. So in this case, this was when I was at the State Library. I was looking at one of these books, and it gave me a huge amount of information on one of my convicts. And I didn't know, so being new to family history, I sat there with my camera in the library and took my photo and came home and started looking at all this information and thought, well, okay, I can take that as being correct because somebody wrote it and put it in a book, but I need to actually satisfy myself that what's here is correct. So that sent me off on the hunt of finding things. So it mentioned convicts in Port Phillip. So that's where I found this book, which listed my relative who came out as an exile to Victoria. Then there was a wonderful series of magazines that was written in New South Wales, published in New South Wales, and sadly it's no longer published. But in it there was a story, and it was the Atkins name that jumped out at me again. This led me to a cousin that's got lots of information, which led me somewhere else. It's not on the internet. Okay, you might go and search all those convicts here yourself, but they're all in one book. rather than spend hours and hours looking on the internet for something, it's all there in one book. Someone else has already done it for you. So magazines and newsletters. So this is the magazine I was talking about, Australian Family Tree Connections. We've got many years of them in our library. You can't borrow them, but you can sit in the library and just browse through them, read through them, just skim through them. It's amazing the number of things you can find in this magazine. It was specifically people putting in little stories or a photograph or some question about their family, and someone else in Australia would go, oh, that's a relative of mine, and get in touch with you. And I had a lot of success in the early years. I would send a photograph off, and next thing I'd find some more people. And that's how I came across this photograph. Was a cousin that I didn't know got in touch with me. And this is a photo of my great-grandmother taken about 2 years before she died. This is about 1923, 24, somewhere like that. So that's the actual oldest photograph I've got of my great-grandmother. And that's because I put a little article in this magazine. Sadly, this sort of magazine doesn't seem to exist anymore because everyone goes, oh, it's on the internet. I'll go and put something on the internet. But that's a valuable go-to place if you're looking for that hard-to-find person in Australia. Also, magazines from other family history groups and historical societies are super, super valuable. These little ones here are from the Geelong district, the Pivot Tree, and many of our ancestors arrived in Geelong and set off for the goldfields from Geelong. So you'll find there's connections there. If your family came through Geelong, went to Ballarat up into the goldfields, and you can't find when they arrived, have a look at something like the Geelong Family History Group's Pivot Tree. Fabulous stories relating to Geelong families, but they extend out. Tasmania, their books are equally fabulous. If you had someone who came into Tasmania as a convict and then you lose them, what happened to them? These magazines have wonderful articles about orphan schools, school histories, research by the people who live in the area. They're not on the internet, and you could maybe find the information if you want to spend a year on the internet, but there it all is in one little book. And it led me to some more cousins. This photograph here came from a connection down in Tasmania. This is a distant relative in South Africa. And this photograph here came from the Launceston area. It was a little article in the magazine, pointed me to the fact they had a little museum. I emailed the museum, and lo and behold, they had this photograph of the family home, which they emailed to me for free. It's not on the internet anywhere. The little person down there had done the research. They knew about it. Oh, yes, here it is, and sent it on. So magazines for specific areas, research by the local people, are really valuable when you're doing your research. Now, my other favourite topic is Symmetries and Transcriptions. This little book here is when I was in a library in Belfast, and it's greystone inscriptions with biographical notes. And in here, apart from giving me what's on the headstone, it all gave me information about the will and the probate and other family members. So it was out with my camera and took a photograph, so I didn't have to worry about paying, I think it was about 20 cents Australian for a photocopy, but the camera worked just as well. And then when I got home, I could zoom in on it and read it clearly. So then our library has wonderful books like the Irish Graveyard books. These are for specific cemeteries. Some of them go up to 5, 6, 7 parts because they're big cemeteries. Again, this is the local people who understand the writing, who can transcribe if it's in Gaelic. They've gone round and transcribed these cemeteries. It might be the only place you're going to find it because it was done quite some time ago, and the headstones may now be too hard to read. Whether Find a Grave or Billion Graves have done them, who knows, that they don't get to everything. So these books, if you know your people come from a certain area, fabulous, and you can borrow them from our library. This is the equivalent for Scotland. This is Scottish Kirkyard, same thing. Most of these little books will have a map in them. So this one, you have numbers down the page. That number references the number on the map. So even if you're not going to get to that church, you can look at a map and get an idea of where they are. And again, it gives you the transcription, and it also gives you extra information about your family and gives you clues as where else to go looking for things, and done by the local people, so they know what they're doing. And then in Victoria, we've got this one. This is it, the cemetery records at Inglewood, and it's a fabulous resource because it's got transcriptions of the headstones that are there, plus it's cross-referenced and has a list of all the burials because they use the cemetery register. It's all in one place, and okay, you can go to find a grave and bury a grave and put a name in, but you could be missing out on information for your family. So this is, as I said, there's a little map of the cemetery, and then this is their listing of the graves. It gives you information that has come out of the register, and then of course it goes into all the transcriptions. Now, street directories, this is actually one of my street directories. I collect random things if they relate to the area. So having grown up in Glen Waverley, this one is, I've got two, 1958 and 1959. So it shows you how the streets grew, how the area grew, the change in names to streets. It's just a little quirky thing that helps you when you're researching a particular area. These particular Collins ones are not on the internet anywhere. There are early street maps available in different places on the internet, but it's actually, I think it cost me, 50 cents or something at a trash and treasure market. Wasn't expensive, and I went, okay, I need that because it's the whole of Melbourne. So then I started looking at Sunshine, where I have relatives and other areas, and watched how those areas grew. Handy to have. And there's lots of directories now that are held in libraries, although more and more are online. Older ones like that are still valuable. School atlases. Now, this particular school atlas, on the inside of the cover, I know that it is one of my relatives' atlases, and this is 1889 when he was at school. And the interesting thing is it says it has a comprehensive index, and actually what you find is half the book is index, half is maps. But it gives you the old parishes. We sort of forget that Victoria at one stage had parishes the same as the UK does. And it shows here that Mornington goes from here all the way down to here, which covers our area. And state by state, we sort of forget that there's different areas. You see names and you think, oh, what is that name? It was the early parishes. So a school atlas like this, again, thank you, Mum, for keeping stuff. Very handy. I actually have 4 school atlases. I have this one, I have one of my mother's and one of mine, and I have one for a son. So I can cover school, and you see the change in names, change in slightly in borders and areas, just gives you more information on the family and the locality that you're looking at. And yearbooks. Yearbooks, now there are some yearbooks that are on the internet now, but if you find one at a trash and treasure stall, or you find one at a secondhand bookshop and it's in your era, and it's, pick it up, have a look at it. They have fabulous records in here. This one's published by the Herald newspaper, 1950, gives a list of all the important things that happened in the year, has heaps and heaps of photographs in it. It has stories that were going on about the meteorology, geography of Australia, statistics by states. It has photographs of people, mainly men, but there is the odd lady in here. It's it's always good to have a look at the broad context of an era that you're researching. Pick them up when you see them, because they're always a bonus. And then there's things that you're going to find that aren't necessarily a book, and they're certainly not on the internet. And that's when you go to places. So if you go into a church in the area that you're researching, you'll come across, this one's in Kyneton, and it's a window dedicated to Joseph Langham Dale and his wife Emily. This one up here is in Ballarat. It's two brothers who died in World War I, and it's in a window in the church in Ballarat. If you didn't know that they served in World War I, there's your hint to go looking at more detail, and it tells you that parents George and Clara, and that they're also members of the church. So it's giving you more clues of places to go, things to look at. And then we've got museums and family history groups. So this photograph here is in a big collage at Williamstown Museum. It's the only photograph I've seen of George. And I was at the museum, and I'm just walking around, and I don't know, your eyes just pick out names and you go, oh, wow, fabulous. Always, if you know, looking at your family, pop into a museum. You go down to Kirrirup, and as Heather said, you've got books there and you've got photos there. Anytime you're in the area where your family came from and you've got a museum or a family history group or historical society, pop in, get in touch with them. This is half of our collection for Casey Cardinia. This is all the books that we are systematically gathering for the Casey Cardinia region. You can't borrow them, but you can sit there and read them. We've now got scanning facilities, or there's a photocopier. It's helpful if you're from, you know, you could be in, I don't know, Albury, and you're having a holiday in Melbourne, and you think, oh, I'll pop down and see what they've got on the family that were in, you know, Chembrook. A family history group or a museum or a library is where you want to go to talk to people. Libraries are, they've got so much in them. The State Library has got this new room, which is now their genealogy room, which is also next to the newspaper room. So you could go and spend a week there. I know in New Zealand they have a night once in, I think it's Wellington's library, where you can go and stay in the library overnight and research for 24 hours once a year. That's my idea of heaven. I don't need to sleep if I've got books there to look at. The Paran Mechanics Institute have a fabulous resource for Victorian books on every subject under the sun. Your local library, you know, Cranbourne Library, that, you know, books, and not only books, people who can answer questions. Historical societies, the National Library of Australia, you can, search online and see if they've got the book, and then see if you can do an interlibrary loan. You just go to your local library and say, this book is in New South Wales, or this book is at the National Library, can you get it in for me? And universities have libraries, and schools have libraries. So if you're looking for something, so the H.V. Mackay Archives, which is the Sunshine Harvester Company, their archives are at Melbourne University. Now you can get in touch with the university. Some things, if they're in archives, you can't actually physically look at, but if they're in their library, you can go in and look at them. If you know you're looking for something specific, they'll scan something for you and get it to you. So universities are another resource to think about when you've got that brick wall and something you can't find. And people in groups. So this is the Cranbourne Library's meeting room, and that's Heather and Lynn and our lovely group of people here having a talk about a subject that's relating to family history. People have great knowledge. at any point in time, you're going to come across someone who's already researched what it is you're looking at, or the area you're looking in, or a book that you're looking in, or a website that you're looking in. People talk back to you, not like a computer. If you don't put the right words in, the computer doesn't find what you're looking for. So if you've got a person and you've got someone you can chew over a problem with, they've possibly already done it, or they'll know someone else, or they can put you in the right direction. And these groups, they publish books. This is a few years back, so there's not as many books there now, but we've now done 13 cemetery walks where we've published a book. That's close to 700 family names for our local area. So it might be the only place where that person's been recorded in a little story. And you might be distantly related, but if you go to our library, we've got our books. And all the other historical groups and family history groups, they do the same thing. They're just as valuable as a book, and it's much more fun than sitting in isolation on a computer. So that's it for me. Go and visit a library, go and visit a family history group, find people to talk to, and thank you for listening.